Welcome to the Entrepreneur on Campus podcast. Let's go. My name is Matthew Brown. I am a student, I am an entrepreneur, and I love learning. I have created this podcast to help you discover hidden opportunities. So this interview is a little bit different than the ones that I've done previously. I changed up the order of the questions. I changed up the format of the podcast. And the reason why is because as I was looking over the bio of John Richards, the man who I interviewed, I recognized that he had just a ton of experience with entrepreneurship, and I thought that it would be better to focus on the elements of entrepreneurship than just what he's focused on in his career, which is very extensive. To give you an idea of who John Richards is, he was the first entrepreneur to put yellow pages on the internet. Over the course of his career, he has experienced several high multiple exits, assisted one of his companies to merge and then IPO, or become public. He's invested personally in dozens of startups. He's mentored thousands of entrepreneurs, and he actively participates as an advisor to many companies and organizations. His bootcamp for entrepreneurs, Startup Ignition, holds regular sessions in Utah. So this interview was honestly so useful. He tells you about what size you want for a total addressable market. He gives great advice for things to do before starting a business, what's really important, and things to be aware of as you're going about growing the business and nailing the business model. I hope that you guys enjoy this interview with John Richards. Awesome. Today I'm here with John Richards. John, thanks for inviting me into your home. I'm excited to have this interview with you.
Great. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so I have a lot of things that I want to talk about. As I just mentioned to you, I've actually mixed up the order of the questions a lot. And the questions that I'm going to ask are very different from the previous interviews that I've done. As I looked through your bio and what you've done, and I think that myself and my audience will be able to get a lot of value from this interview. So just to start off, can you just tell me, what is your story? How did you get started with entrepreneurship?
So I'm from Seattle, and I went to Brigham Young University as an undergraduate and went to Utah. And then when I was finished with that education, and I was pre-med and didn't go into medical school, and so instead returned to Seattle and got involved in the Yellow Pages industry. In 1984, while I was in college, a huge landmark event happened, and that is the AT&T company, the one started by Alexander Graham Bell, was one of the biggest companies and most powerful companies in the world, and dominated telecommunications at a monopoly level. So the federal government of the United States broke up the company into 8 separate companies to encourage competition. So they were ruled a monopoly. And that was in 1982. The judgment came down, and in 84, right when I was in college, the federal government broke up that company into the 8 pieces. And it had 5 major lines of business, local dial tone, long distance, equipment manufacturing, and also one of them was Yellow Pages. And Yellow Pages was very lucrative, and it wasn't regulated. So after college, I got into the Yellow Page industry, publishing, so selling advertising in distributed Yellow Pages directories into homes and businesses. They would be distributed up in the Seattle area, and that was a lucrative business and a very great opportunity because the competition was really rampant after the breakup of that huge company. And so that's how I got into that, and for about 10 years I did that company and grew it, and it was very innovative. We cut a lot of new ground in the industry with what we named the company, bringing color printing and processes when it used to just be black ink on yellow paper, and lots of different things. And so that was fun. And then we expanded to Portland, Oregon, and we competed against one of the breakoff companies called US West in our markets. And we did real well and got into some skirmishes with them and all that type of thing. And then about 10 years into it, the advent of the internet happened, and I was the first guy to put Yellow Pages up on the internet, which was a big thing in my career. So I sold the print company and launched the first ever internet yellow pages, and then I merged in with some people from Microsoft, and we created a company called InfoSpace that went public in 1998. And then in 2001, I retired, and BYU, my alma mater, called up and invited me to be a professor of entrepreneurship, which I became in 2002, and moved down here to Utah, and I stayed there 12 years.
Wow.
And teaching at Brigham Young University. Very involved as an angel investor in the Utah ecosystem for the venture world, and did that. After finishing BYU, I spent a couple years with Google. I helped the mayor of Provo sell the fiber network to Google, and Google then hired me to head up that operation here in Utah, and I did that for a couple of years. And then afterwards, instead of going back and teaching at BYU, I started my own entrepreneur bootcamp called Startup Ignition, which is what I've done for the last 3 or so years.
Wow.
That's me in a nutshell.
Wow, that's awesome.
I have 4 children, 6 grandchildren, and 1 on the way. So
That's great. That's fantastic. Did you feel like, so you mentioned that you were doing pre-medicine. Do you feel like you were born an entrepreneur, or is it something that you kind of stumbled into?
Well, I don't believe people are born entrepreneurs. I believe that entrepreneurship is a learnable skill. So I believe people can learn the skill and become quite a competent entrepreneur. There's obviously some traits and characteristics that could be inherent and inherited and genetic, but I actually am quite a shy person, but my ambition overrides my shyness. So then I can be a teacher and an entrepreneurial leader and be ambitious and aggressive in the business world because I think my ambition's high.
Interesting.
Yeah, my wife will tell you I'm more of an introvert. It's just fascinating.
Yeah.
So
That is fascinating. So you've invested in dozens of different companies. You've built and sold many companies. You've advised thousands of entrepreneurs. What would you say are the 3 most important lessons you've learned that you can share for an aspiring entrepreneur?
3 most important lessons are that you have to really focus on your management skills. Entrepreneurs manage 3 things: people, processes, and things or assets. And so like the people management skills are critical. That's something that really brings a lot of entrepreneurs down because they can launch companies, but then as it grows and scales and they add employees, they're very poor at managing people. And so the art of managing people and building teams is something that's really important. So the lesson learned is that to really understand the importance of people and team building and managing people. So that's one thing. Second thing is that there's no difference between the great entrepreneurs in the history of the world that you read about and aspire to be like, and any of your listeners, yourself or me. Anybody can be a successful entrepreneur accomplishing great things if they just understand that there's a prescribed set of behaviors and activities you need to do to be successful, and you don't need to be born in a certain family, born in a certain situation. You can actually rise above whatever past or history you have and create a great company, especially here in the United States.
Awesome.
Let's see, a third thing, big lesson, understanding capitalization and ownership. So understanding how important at the beginning of a venture it is to understand how you capitalize a company and create ownership and how ownership works as you bring on co-founders and investors and employees, and how to really optimize your use of the currency of your capital to do great things and preserve and create wealth.
That was actually a question I was going to ask you about a little bit later on in the interview. Is how is it that you recommend to structure a company with equity?
Well, so that's an interesting question, especially for anyone in college, at the great universities such as Brigham Young is one, so is the University of Utah, or any of the ones in Silicon Valley, or any of the ones in the great tech centers around the country, lots of students creating companies, and they tend to just, 4 people in a class, they start a company and actually get traction, things are happening, and they split it up 25, 25, 25, 25, or 2 people 50, 50. Those are huge disasters and mistakes in a company. So there's a new process in the last 10 years that's emerged called slicing pie, which is uses the concept of dynamic equity during the search phase for a business model in a startup. The first part of a startup is actually searching for a business model, not scaling and growing the company. And during that search phase, while the team is figuring out a business model, you can have the equity be dynamic and not fix the equity, and use a proxy system for contributions and calculate accurately what percentage each person should have. That's the best way to do things. I've used that many times, and many of the people I've mentored have used that to great outcomes. And because it's kind of silly on the day one of a new venture to fix the equity, because you don't know what everybody's going to contribute and who's going to do what and what roles everybody's going to fulfill. But some rules of thumb: if you are going to do fixed equity, which still most people do, because dynamic equity, as detailed in the book Slicing Pie, is a new concept and it's slowly gaining ground. But absolutely don't do anything that's 50-50. All of us have a governance mechanism to make final decisions. Don't ever start a company without having founder vesting. That means when you start a company with 2, 3, 4 co-founders, they all subject their equity to vesting, meaning that if one of them quits early, takes off, or doesn't fulfill what they said they were going to do, that the equity can come back to the company and not be retained by them, because retention of the equity by a non-performer at the founder level is a real problem.
Wow, that was a lot of insight right there.
Okay.
And is contribution measured by time allotted, or by...
Well, in that slicing pie mechanism, again, if you ever wanted to interview Michael Moyer on the phone, I could set you up for that. He's the inventor of slicing pie, and his name's Michael Moyer, and he's a friend, and we've spoken at different conferences together. But slicing pie's base recommendation is to take value and assign value to contributions. One of them is hard money. So if you're actually putting cash in the business, you put a 4 times multiplier on the cash. So if you put in $1 of cash, you get $4 of credit in counting up contribution. Then the next one is time. If you put in your time, you say, what is your time worth per hour? And you're contributing that time, and you do a 2 times multiplier on the time. So if my time were worth $25 an hour and I worked an hour, I get $50 credit for putting in the time. If I were contributing equipment, it would be the depreciated value of the equipment as a 1 times multiplier. If I were contributing intellectual property, we'd come up to an agreement what that was worth. So
it's putting like almost a dollar value.
A dollar value, and then you track it week by week for maybe 6 months, a year, 18 months, and you track those contribution levels to figure out and give you an idea of how the equity should be broken up. It really solves a lot of problems. Nothing's perfect, but this is vastly improved over the mistake of fixing. I mean, on day one, you have 3 founders, and one guy gets 60% and the other 2 get 20%. Well, maybe the 60% main founder deserves 60%. It was his idea, and he's the CEO, and he's driving it. But if the 2 other founders, one of them does 90% of the other work, and the other guy only does 10%, and they were even 20-20, that causes massive problems in a company.
Wow.
And with no mechanism to fix it, you can create lots of resentment and envy that really cause problems.
Wow. Yeah, I definitely want to read that book before launching a company.
Yeah.
So would you say that, I've heard a lot of people say that successful startups are lucky. It's the right person at the right time with the right idea. Would you say that startups are are more of a science, or is it more luck?
Well, I say it's more of a science, but there is serendipity involved as well. Being at the right place at the right time. So my son actually gives a talk. My son Tyler Richards, who was the co-founder of Dev Mountain, and he gives a talk and talks about his top 10 things for entrepreneurs, and his first one is be lucky. And then he explains, but luck is where preparation meets opportunity. So all of us have opportunity to be entrepreneurs and start successful businesses that pass by us. And the question is, are we prepared to capitalize and leverage those opportunities? And so luck is best defined in that way. If you have studied entrepreneurship, prepared yourself to hear a great idea, and then jump on a team, work with others, and do it right, then you're going to have good things happen. And you can call that luck, but it's actually you were prepared when the opportunity passed by you and you jumped on the opportunity. That's really what it is. I absolutely believe at its heart, though, entrepreneurship is a science, and it's really fascinating. The entire lean startup movement of the last decade is actually applying sixth grade science, the scientific method, to entrepreneurship. That's what lean startup is saying, oh, I have an idea for a business, a hypothesis. Now I'm going to run experiments and test those hypotheses and see if it turns out the way I thought or not. If it doesn't turn out the way, I'm going to pivot and change my hypothesis.
Looking at it objectively.
Yeah, it's just it's truly evidence-based entrepreneurship. It's really, and that's what evens the playing field and allows even less experienced people to do great things. One of the interesting things is that you back test the success over the last 100 years of entrepreneurs, and you'll see that they practice lean startup. What's happened in the last 10 years is just the process has now been codified into a system that we can follow.
Intriguing. Would you ever advise against an entrepreneur starting a company without other founders?
Besides the rule of 50-50, never to do 50-50 ownership structures, the second biggest rule to break is probably lone wolf entrepreneurship. But that comes with an asterisk, meaning if you're going to do a scalable venture, because there's different type of startups and ventures. A highly scalable venture that's intended to be a big company and change the world with disruptive technology or do great big things, that absolutely should not be attempted by a lone wolf entrepreneur. It's impossible. The skill set just to do the early validation work to find a business model and product market fit, and then the growth and scaling process requires multiple founders. Now, if you're going to do opposite end of the spectrum type of business, which is a fill a need, non-scalable lifestyle small business, then you can be a lone wolf entrepreneur. And those businesses tend to be the kind that where the founder exchanges his time for money, or
doctors,
or her skill set is highly she's got a lot of high skills that can be traded for the money of customers, and it's highly dependent on the skill set of the founder. Those type of businesses are different. The whole purpose of a scalable venture is that the founders aren't required to be there so that the enterprise can be sold. A lifestyle business is different. It's so dependent on the founder that the company can't ever be sold because the founder is so integrated with the services of the business. Anyway, that's a long discussion. Don't mean to get off in the weeds.
That's okay. That's okay. How important is the size of the market if you are looking to have an exit in the company?
Well, first of all, size of the market is huge for the entrepreneur to consider, but it's in the venture world, venture investors, that's the first question. That's the go, no-go question. If the market's not big enough, external venture investors won't invest in the company no matter how great the idea is or no matter how well you're doing, because if they put in money, they need it to come back out at a high return, and they're shooting for like 10x return. Meaning if an angel investor puts $100,000 in your startup, they want $1 million to come back to them. And that's only going to happen if you have a large market. If it's a small market, the company won't get big enough to have that kind of an exit. So that's important for the investor. But even so, as an entrepreneur, you should be looking at total addressable market, the size of that market from the get-go too, when you're analyzing whether to start a business or not.
What's a good number for?
$1 billion total addressable market. Now that's defined as, the most common way to define total addressable market would be how many total customers are there in your entire universe for this product or service, and how much would they spend per year on average with you. And you do the simple multiplication. So if it was, 5 million potential customers, and they were going to spend $100 with you per year, so 5 million times 100 is $500 million market. That's actually small by venture comparisons. The bottom line that most venture ecosystem players are looking for is at least $1 billion total addressable market. And when we look at the customers, we're just kind of usually looking at US. You can look worldwide for some types of customers. We say US, but it's actually not that hard to get to $1 billion if you really think about it. A lot of businesses will have 20 million potential customers at $1,000 a year. Well, 20 million at $1,000 a year is $20 billion.
Yeah.
Okay, so there you go. Anyway.
Wow. So it's looked at by year, how much is spent per year. Yeah,
average customer revenue per year. If you to estimate, my average customer will spend $100 or $1,000 or $10,000 with me in a year. How many are there? And just do that simple math, and you want it to come out to $1 billion or more. But the funny thing is there are also a lot of small opportunities that have $80 million total markets. That means you'd have to capture 100% of the market to even have just $80 million of revenue, which is puny in venture terms.
Have you ever gone after any of those?
No, I would never want to go after stuff like that.
You always try to set the benchmark at least $1 billion.
Yes, because that's how you create an ecosystem around your company where investors and top talent will want to join and be a part of it if they know what they're all doing, right? So, because they should know these numbers as well.
So you've been involved with a lot of different companies, a lot of different businesses, and you've been able to run some of them simultaneously. What are your thoughts and opinions on running multiple businesses simultaneously?
I actually have never really done multiple simultaneously, and I'm very much against that. And it's called parallel entrepreneurship, and parallel entrepreneurship generally doesn't work, especially with those scalable types of companies. You can do lifestyle businesses, maybe have 2 or 3 of them going that just exchange services for money and aren't really scalable in nature. But a truly scalable venture with a disruptive technology or something where you're trying to really change the world with what you're doing is very hard to do in multiple companies. I actually just talked to somebody about this at lunch yesterday. This is why Warren Buffett says that Jeff Bezos has become the wealthiest person in the history, is because nobody has done what he's done. Jeff Bezos has completely dominated 2 industries at the same time. That's very, very hard to do. And, those 2 industries are, online e-commerce, and then also compute infrastructure with Amazon Web Services, running the world's compute infrastructure, and which is the second business is way more lucrative and profitable. And that domination that's occurred there is very unique, and Warren Buffett called that out and said he just never has met anybody else that's done that of all the people he's ever invested and looked at. And that's just, but that should be taken by all of us to understand that how difficult it is. And I have many, I won't say just here in Utah, that have tried to do parallel entrepreneurship, and they basically were mediocre in a lot of companies as opposed to being great in one company. So serial entrepreneurship works and is great. That's where a great entrepreneur does a company, runs its full course, then does another one, then another one, then another one in succession in serial. Parallel, very hard. But think about it. I mean, the switching costs of the human brain is high. The human brain can only think about one thing at one time in the frontal lobe of our brain. So if you're multitasking between multiple companies, just the ramp up and ramp down from working on each company consumes a lot of time, energy, and effort just to switch between multiple companies. It's not that easy. It's a myth to think that you can do it.
Wow. That just got me thinking. That got me thinking a lot. I'll just move on to the next question.
Okay.
I lost my thought. This was the question. When you have started companies in the past and when you're starting them in the future as well, do you set a specific time period of when you want to exit?
No, I thought you were going to ask a certain time period of when to launch. But to exit, no real time period, but the goal is usually to exit within 3 to 7 years. Because if I'm doing a scalable business, I'm probably taking external investors on, and they're going to want to see an exit sometime in 3 to 7 years for about 10x. Mm-hmm. The sooner it's done, the higher the return on investment they get. They're wanting to have an internal rate of return probably of at least 35% for that is a return commensurate with the risk they took, investing in an early stage company. So in general terms, I guess I could say that there is that. If you start having exits go beyond 10 years, which many great ones in Utah recently have done, then it's kind of getting kind of long in the tooth, as they would say. But Omniture here in Utah and Qualtrics here in Utah were well over 10 years, both of those, and they had huge exits. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it takes that long to have those kind of huge exits. So. Mm-hmm. As far as launching, though, I thought you were going to say putting a date on while you're searching for a business model and product market fit and figuring out your business model. I don't like putting a date for launch. That's why I thought you were going to ask that, but I'll just throw that in, that you shouldn't put an artificial date because that could force you to launch with an inferior business model.
When you're not ready for it.
Yeah.
Awesome. So on your LinkedIn, I was reading what you put under Startup Ignition. This is what it says. We enable our students by removing the fluff from a traditional 4-year degree or other outdated programs and delivering an intense and impactful result-driven curriculum. So with that, I'd be super curious to hear about your advice on education, on college, on developing technical skills like development, like accounting. What is your thought about that?
Well, there's a crisis in higher education. So higher education has gotten very expensive, fueled a lot by the easy money of the last 20 years being loaned and granted to college students. So there's huge, it's like 7% annual tuition increases, and it's created a false economy in the higher education world with bloated PhD and professor salaries and things. That's a whole nother problem. Also, there's a disconnect between the students and their parents and what the academics think the purpose of a university is. I read one very detailed report on this where the students and parents think the number one purpose of a university is to get the student a good job and a good income. And that's number 7 on the list of the academic.
Really?
Yeah, there's a total disconnect on what the number 1 on the academic was to get the student to think better. So a lot of academics just want them to think like them. Okay, so there's these problems. Only about 10 majors or so on an average university campus have a positive ROI anymore, where you get a good return on your investment for the tuition dollars. Also, universities are not very good at teaching skills-based learning. So they're good at liberal arts and teamwork and things like that. What universities are excellent at is collisions. In other words, the reason why universities are important still is that students and faculty and people come together on university campus and talk and discuss and learn about a lot of things, and then they collide with one another organically, and their hunches become stronger ideas, and great companies come from that. And it's the collisions that happen between the people and their ideas with other people and their ideas that makes a university great. The actual instruction, degrees, and all that are not performing the way they need to. Like I said, the hard sciences, some of the business degrees, information systems, a great one. I think you said you were interested in information systems. Yeah. And those have good positive ROI, but most don't. And many don't. That it's a problem. So this gave birth to the modern day bootcamp industry. And that started with software engineering, which is in high demand. Software engineers, or software coders as they're called, are in high demand to build products in the American workplace, because software is very important. But the 4-year degree programs in computer science were not producing the right type of workers. They were more productive in producing PhDs in computer science to think about nebulous ideas in high-end computer science, but are not actually building software products. So these boot camps emerged about a decade ago, where in 12 weeks, a talented coder could teach you how to become a junior developer in 12 weeks. And this ended up being very good for the participants. They would literally, oops, sorry about that, and the noise in the background here. But they would literally, in 12 weeks, go from, let's say, making $35,000 salaries to $65,000 to $85,000. That's right here in Utah that was happening. My son, Tyler Richards, was co-founder of Dev Mountain that did that, and there's other boot camps here in Utah and across the country doing this. And then that gave rise to other boot camps. So my Startup Ignition is an entrepreneur boot camp. It's a skills-based endeavor to be an entrepreneur, just like it's a skills-based endeavor to be a software engineer and build software products. And so in a matter of a few weeks, a been there, done it instructor that's a good teacher can actually teach you those skills and then mentor you through mastering the skills. That's very important. This is, Provo's had a great digital marketing boot camp. These boot camps are very disruptive to education. Matter of fact, it's really fascinating what's happened now, like the University of Utah and others are actually, they're bringing these boot camps onto campus and having them teach students how to become coders.
Really?
Independent or as an additive curriculum to the computer science program.
Really?
Yeah.
So do the universities pay these?
Yeah, so like the universities will pay the boot camps to run boot camps on campus for a semester. And it's brilliant.
Intriguing.
It's brilliant. But that starts questioning, what does the 4-year degree get you? If you don't want to become a PhD in computer science, what does a 4-year computer science degree give you? Now, a lot of people hear that and really argue with me on that. But if I can go 12 weeks and start making $85,000 a year and be to $120,000 a year later as I hone my skills as a junior developer up to becoming a senior developer, what was the 4-year degree for?
Yeah.
It's interesting. And I talk to a lot of CEOs. They don't really care where the person got their skills as long as they just have them.
Interesting. And you've primarily been one of the founders, and I'm curious, do you think it's important for a founder to have that technical knowledge of knowing how to knowing how to do coding, or would you advise somebody to learn how to do specific things?
Let me repeat the advice I get from when I ran the lecture series at BYU for more than a decade, and we would have the guest lecturers that are tech entrepreneurs and successful tech executives and leaders. We would have them after their lecture meet with a handful of students for Q&A. I would ask the first question, if you could go back to college and do it again, what would you change about your college experience? And by far the most common thing is they said they would take coding classes. They would have taken they would take coding classes, and the coding classes that literally just introduction to coding Java or something, that you get in the information systems program, or just that. And the reason is not to become a software engineer or a coder themselves. It's that their entire career, they did not know how to manage coders. And when a coder would say, well, here's what the problem is, this is why we're late, this is why it's not working, they would not know in any way
how to keep them accountable.
And how that was true or not. So about 10% of the people that take coding boot camps right now are actually entrepreneurs that want to get that skill to work with software engineers better. About 10%. That's interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the reason why I'm looking at information systems, is I feel like I would fit into that.
Information systems is a great degree.
Yeah. And are you plans for Startup Ignition? Do you plan on exiting with that, or is that more of a lifestyle?
It's not a fully scalable business, and so dependent on my skill and the skills of our other instructors, it's really not that probably likely of an exit for that. My big thing I want to do with Startup Ignition is take it from an in-person classroom type experience that's an intensive boot camp and get it online. That's one of my goals, is to make a really stellar online version of it.
Wow, that's awesome. So I'm curious how you've been able to do a lot of different things in your career. How has your motive changed over time of maybe from your first startup to where you are now?
Well,
What drives you?
when you're young and hungry, ambitious, you're trying to make your first $1 million
Yeah.
or and change the world with your ideas and just driving and working tons of hours and all that. Once you've kind of arrived, the climb up the mountain is definitely more fun than even arriving at the top of the mountain. But once you've arrived at the top of the mountain, you kind of go into more of a mode of, let's just conserve my personal wealth. Let's just do fun things, do what I want to do, and share knowledge and help people, kind of thing. That happens more. But that's not true for everybody. Others just keep driving and driving and driving. But my wife said to me, one day, how much money do you need? We're good. Let's, spend more time with the kids, type of thing.
Yeah.
So
Awesome.
and that's the move from Seattle and to become a college professor really helped me to do that, because the prior 15, 18 years of work before that was very hard driving.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
what are your thoughts about working with friends and family?
it's a landmine, minefield, so to speak. You have to be very careful. We talk about this in my Startup Initiative Bootcamp quite a bit, actually. You have to be very, very careful. The Japanese believe in nepotism in business because the trust level between family members can be enormous that you can't get in any other way. But at the same time, if you treat it too nonchalantly and not businesslike, it can create massive misunderstandings and mismanaged expectations and really ruin relationships. If you want to ruin your Thanksgiving and Christmas, go into business with family. So you have to manage it. All of my interactions in business with family have been very businesslike in order to preserve the relationships.
So it's not that you can't be involved with business with your family members. It's just when you do so, be very businesslike.
Treat it just like it was arm's length stranger.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool. That's good to know. So you've been able to have a lot of achievement. What have been one or two of your biggest failures?
I've had a lot of failures as an entrepreneur and an investor. So
Yeah.
had companies that have failed and spent a lot of money on them, and they failed and didn't work out. And then as an investor too, I mean, I've done about 85 direct investments.
Wow.
And if I take away the top 5 best ones, I'm a big loser. That's how it works. In venture investing, it's, you invest in 10 companies and you hope one is a grand slam and another one's kind of a home run or a triple, and the other 8 are probably losers. That's how it goes a lot. And so that's just how it's played.
Yeah.
And so...
Yeah. So there's a lot of failure involved with entrepreneurship always.
And that's just like in lean startup. There's a lot of failure.
Fail fast, fail quick, right?
What lean startup is about is not changing the human failure rate. It's just moving all the failure to be cheap and quick up front. Instead of taking a long time in between failure points, you're pushing all the failure to the beginning of the process where it's cheap and easy to fail. Not when it's later, when you've started scaling, ramped up, and you realize, oh my goodness, I just ramped up and scaled a company and I don't even have a good business model. That happens all the time, though. That's the mission of Startup Ignition, is to reverse that trend.
When you're deciding on whether or not to invest in a company, what are the biggest things that you look at?
Well, I have a 2-page due diligence worksheet that I give the entrepreneur to fill out and complete, and it's pretty hard to complete it, but I look at the business model. I'm looking to see if they've really nailed a business model, and that's probably best represented by traction. And traction, I look for traction in 3 areas: revenue, customers, and users. So I'd like to see 4 to 6 months of month-over-month growth in revenue, customers counts, or user counts, depending on what type of business it is. And so there's a great book called Traction that has come out in the last decade. That's one of the most important books in entrepreneurship over the last decade, and it's called Traction, and it's all about that. It's really good.
Awesome. I'll link that to the show notes.
Okay.
What are some of the most relevant markets that would you say that's completely dependent, or if you had to choose a couple different markets to start a company in right now,
You mean just
where
like
would you choose?
areas or vertical markets or something?
Vertical markets.
Well, if I hot would be looking at anything where you're combining genetics and software. All the future potential with those two combined is really interesting. Blockchain, which is in the doldrums right now because of crypto issues, but ignoring that, just what blockchain brings to the world is really interesting. So I think if somebody were to really do something in the blockchain space right now, that was really important, even though it's kind of a tough time for blockchain because it flew so high a year or two ago, it still could be good and big. There's just areas of still tons of opportunity in B2B SaaS companies. That's business to business software as a service companies. That's my favorite vertical area because they're easier companies. Utah's really good at those type of companies, by the way. B2B SaaS companies are what we call one actor models. You're just a company selling a service, a productized service and software to your business customer, and that's what Omniture was. Now that's Adobe Analytics. That's what Qualtrics is. That's what Podium, if you've heard of that.
Yeah.
Divi. All these companies are B2B SaaS companies, and they're simpler, easier technology. And then you just have to have really good business development sales, and that's why Utah really flourishes at these kind of companies. The technology is a little easier. It's not very deep tech, and then the sales ability to generate revenue is really a talent that Utah has.
Yeah, and those are usually recurring revenue models, right, with the software companies.
Exactly. Yeah, that's kind of inferred in the word SaaS.
Yeah,
software as a service
that's
sold on a
pretty much how it
subscription
works.
basis. Yep.
Gotcha. So let's say that I decide today, wow, I've changed my mind. I want to be an entrepreneur. What are the first 3 actionable steps that you would give for me to take?
Read the book, The Startup Owner's Manual by Steve Blank. That's the Bible. So you need to read that. And that's about how you actually take an idea, form a hypothesis, and actually validate the hypothesis to find a business model. And it's a step-by-step encyclopedic guide. So if you're going to do that, it's $10 on Kindle, $30 book, and you read that. Reading that would save me 10 hours of one-on-one mentoring time with you. So
Wow.
that would be, you do that. And then as you're reading that, you need to make sure that your idea that you're wanting to run with, if you have one. If you don't have one, you want to be a problem hunter and look for problems. You don't look for ideas, you look for problems to solve. What's a deficiency, a problem in the marketplace that needs fixing? And
How
if
do you get exposure to those problems?
they hit you every day.
Yeah.
The average human sees lots of problems out in the world and in the business world and the marketplace. A lot of times they catch themselves saying, gosh, this doesn't work. I wish somebody would fix this. And my question back to them is, why don't you fix it then and solve the problem? Because you felt the pain. Why don't you fix the problem? If you have an idea, you need to really make sure your idea is worthy and strong enough to even go forward and do lean startup practices on. There's a book called The New Business Road Test, which is the definitive work in how you evaluate whether an idea is worthy of your entrepreneurial time. And that book has a thesis in it saying that 90% of failure in entrepreneurship could be eliminated if entrepreneurs would just stop starting companies with bad ideas. And then he gives you a framework of how to tell if an idea is a good idea.
Wow. Sounds very useful before starting a company.
It is. There's what happens, the average entrepreneur falls in love with their first idea, and no matter what, if a mentor, an expert, or the marketplace themselves through rejecting buying their product or their idea, the entrepreneur still says, no, this is a great idea, and they're just
Emotionally
so
attached
in
to
love
it.
with their idea
Yeah.
that they just, and that gets a lot of people in a lot of trouble.
So you've recommended a couple books already. What would you say if you had to list a couple of the most important books?
So the Startup Owner's Manual by
Yeah.
Steve Blank.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Traction by we're having a burp for his name right now. There's a couple books named Traction, so it's the more recent one. I want to say Nathaniel Groberg, but that's not the name. It's Gabriel something. Oh
Okay.
gosh, okay. Anyway, and then that's terrible. I can't remember his name. Another one is The Mom Test is another one I didn't mention. That's a really good book about validation and making sure you're not getting biased feedback. Let's see. Another great book, especially for younger folks, is a book called What I Wish I Knew When I Was 20 by Tina Seelig from Stanford. That's a great book, too.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I'll put those in the show notes as well. Then the last just couple questions I'd like to ask is how do you personally go about setting goals?
I, kind of ascribe to what I've learned from like the Covey Leadership Center and the Franklin Institute, which are now Franklin Covey merged, and just where you have your values in life, and then you have goals, long-term goals that you set for that, then short-term goals, and then daily activities, and every day organize your day and make sure that your activities are consistent and the tasks that you're working on are consistent with those long-term goals and your values. And that's what I do. So every day I'm kind of attacking a task list, and hopefully that's bringing me towards what I'm
where you want to go
achieve.
in the end.
Yeah. So, I don't do it quite as religiously as I did when I was fully engaged as a active, C-level or CEO in a company. But just every day ranking your tasks and making sure that you're working on the important things and not just letting the urgent things steal all your time so you don't do important things.
Yeah. Do you have a morning routine?
Not so much anymore, but I do. Like today, got up, went and played pickleball for a while. We love pickleball, my wife
so
and I.
much fun.
Yeah. And then come back and answer email and get started on my day. And like I said, one of my big projects is to bring Startup Ignition online. I'm spending a lot of time on that. Yeah, and that type of thing, and that could involve a lot of different fronts and things I got to work on. That's a big endeavor, and I really want to get that done.
Yeah.
So anyway, attacking my goals.
Yeah, and how about when you were deeply involved with, like you're saying, C-level businesses?
Yeah, I just worked a lot. I mean, I was, you got to be careful not to become a workaholic.
Yeah.
When you're a young entrepreneur, but at the same time, entrepreneurship is a life of imbalance. It's not a balanced life. To be a successful entrepreneur. And maybe this is an interesting place to end on, if that's what you're ending on here. But one of my mentors taught me a long time ago that entrepreneurship is working for a few years like nobody else will. This is important, these words, so that you can live the rest of your life like nobody else can. That's an interesting thing. That takes away the workaholism aspect of entrepreneurship. It's not meant to work 80, 90 hours a week till you die at age 70. That's not what entrepreneurs are about. This is working for 5 years like nobody else is willing to do. Work your tail off. Work as hard as possible for 5 years. Have an exit, and then have the freedom to do what you want. That's real entrepreneurship and a good life goal. So during those 5 years, you're out of balance, though. You're going to potentially have, aspects of your life that some other people that work more of an average 9 to 5 working for the man system say, well, yeah, sure, he's got a successful business, but look at it, he never sees his family, doesn't spend much time with his kids, or she's off and ignoring her husband, whatever the case may be that people looking from the outside might judge. But it might be part of a plan to work for 5 years out of balance, so then the rest of your life can be what you want it to be.
I love it.
That's a different thing. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, yeah. Thank you. John Richards.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Entrepreneur on Campus. This interview with John Richards was one of my favorites. I went back and listened to it after the interview, taking notes and writing down all of the things that I wanted to remember. And I hope that you guys found it as valuable as I did. And I hope that you're enjoying this podcast. And if you are, I ask that you subscribe, that you continue listening to new episodes, tell your friends about it, and that you can leave a rating and a review, and continue learning more about the different markets that exist within businesses, and also more about yourself and what kind of business you want to run. Thank you guys so much for listening. I love you. Have a good one.